I want to try to condense the last couple of weeks just to catch us all up. I'm not going to spend too much time rehashing, but just for about 90 seconds to work through where we are right now. Because as we open up the book of Joshua today, we've already crossed some ground. And in each of those moments we've had together, 3 up until today, we've been able to take a look at part of the story of Joshua and then look at our own lives and how God might be birthing a dream in us personally or collectively as a church. There's something that we've taken away each time. And the first one, week 1, we looked at Joshua's, I don't know if you call it his call to the leadership of what's going on. Moses had passed away and he was now getting the baton there. And what we've understood is that there will be times in our lives as God begins a new chapter for you, whatever new chapter is, you can define that according to your own life there. But when God is doing something new with you and when God does something new with us, he is going to purposefully put us in situations that are going to overwhelm us. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by where you are, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're in the wrong spot. It just means this is a chance to lean on Jesus and begin to discover his power. And so the message to Joshua specifically was, when you get to those moments, be strong and courageous, and don't let my words depart from your mouth. Meditate on them day and night, and then you will find success. So if we commit ourselves to the words of God, we'll find success in those overwhelming moments. The next week, we took a look at another part of this story, and we got to a few of the families. There are 12 families, 12 tribes. Sounds a little bit like a mafia, but the 12 families are all there, and 12 of them each of the 12 has a different section of land that is going to be the promised land for it. And the message there was that only when all of the families have fought for each other and every single family has found its home place can the mission be considered successful and end. There's a reason why we say, are we there yet? Not, am I there yet? Like it's a we thing. And until we were all there, we haven't arrived. And our specific journeys are not over. So to this family of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh, the message to them was, you don't get to rest until everyone rests. And then last week, we took a look at one more part here leading up to today. And we've got this lady by the name of Rahab, who is known throughout Scripture over and over as Rahab the prostitute. And Rahab was a part of the story. And as we were working through that, and if you were here with us last week, you understand where we're going here. She grasped this really important truth that she was not a part of the story God was writing by accident, that God had placed her there on purpose, that she was not just accepted, she was invited. She was there not just because God is love, but because God loved her. Specifically putting her there in that family line and allowing her to be in the direct family line that ultimately would produce Jesus in Bethlehem thousands of years later. So all of that leads up till today, where we have the families on one side of the Jordan River, on the east side, and Promised Land is on the west, except for those 3 families that are already in their spot. But everyone is going to have to cross over and get the land. They're going to have to fight for the land. Even though God gave it to them, there are people that are there already. So as we get through to the story today, we've got this idea of Joshua leading the people in a very similar way that Moses was leading the people. And now they're up against their old nemesis, water. It happened 40 years earlier, when Moses led the people out, he led them to the edge of a sea, what we call the Red Sea or the Reed Sea. And so they're led up to the edge of the sea. They're complaining, they're arguing, they're frustrated because Moses is a terrible leader. He led them out of slavery, but took them to this place. He's blaming it on this call that God gave him, but if God is really a God of love, why would they ever bring them to this place? And he as a leader is dealing with all this, and then God stepped in and did what only God could do, and he asked Moses to reach out his hand, and he did, and the waters parted. God's people miraculously got to the other side, and the waters came crashing down, and they never saw their Egyptian captors again. So they were delivered through that. And then they found themselves in another area of land that was still on the wrong side of the water. So now they're on the east side of a different body of water, Jordan River, and most of the promised land is on the west side of the Jordan River. So they're up against it again. That's going to be the first obstacle that they face. And whether or not God told him to, or whether he just wanted to express his faith, Joshua determined that God was going to part the Jordan River just as he had parted the Red Sea, that he was going to get them across. And what unfolds over the next few days and ultimately years is this period of dream walking for God's people. Now, there is a difference between dream walking and sleepwalking, as I'm using it in this context. Sleepwalking, and we all know it's kind of random. And depending on how tired you were, what you ate, what you've been thinking about, like sleepwalking can be really, really odd and random. And it gets you to a point where you kind of come to and you wonder, how did I get here? How do I get back? What is going on? Why am I doing what I'm doing? It's just a very strange thing. If you've never slept walk, be thankful. It's a very weird dynamic, but it's really random. Dream walking is different. Dream walking leads us to a point, really, instead of saying, how did I get here, of saying, I can hardly believe I get a chance to do this. This doesn't seem real. I can't believe God would use someone like me in a moment like this. It's purposeful. It is walking out a dream that God has for you. And God's people were walking out this dream over these next few days and weeks and months. And it, I think, would be foolish for us if God is going to dream up something for us to walk out. I think it would be foolish not to pay attention to the things that they learned as they walked out the dream for them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to work through some of this today and pull out some of these principles that I believe that God's people experienced and that we can maybe even apply to our own lives today. So Joshua's got the information. The spies have come back, the ones that we talked about last week that met up with Rahab, and they said, what did the man say? It wasn't a man, it was a woman. Oh, really? What kind of work is she in? Prostitute, but let's move beyond that. We found this lady, and so they've relayed all of that information to Joshua. So he knows that Jericho is fortified, is established. It's going to take some sort of strategy to find a way in, but God's on their side, and everyone inside of Jericho is afraid, and they fear the God of Israel. So all that's going on, we get to Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, and Joshua told the people, purify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you. His way of getting the people ready was to tell them to worship. He said, you get your hearts and you get your minds and you get your bodies ready for this because God is about to do something great. Now notice he didn't tell them what they were going to do. He didn't tell them the plan. He didn't say exactly what it was that God was going to do great around them. He just said it's going to be big. It's going to be powerful. It's going to be something you need to be prepared for. And the best thing you can do is to get your hearts ready. Get yourself in a position so that God can do what he's chosen to do, and you'll be ready to be a part of it. So the motivation was not to get God to get them across the river. The motivation was just faithfulness. It was their responsibility to honor God the way he had honored them, to be faithful to God the way he had been faithful to them. But the expectation was that they would experience God's favor. So I think for me, as I'm working through this in my own life collectively as a church family, as I'm reflecting on it in that way as well, here's what I'm feeling. Don't expect God to take you where you have not prepared to go. If God is ultimately going to lead us to walk out some dreams in our lives, our individual lives, in our families, in our homes, and then together as a church, don't expect God to take you where you have not prepared yourself to go. If you're not ready for that step, I think ultimately we can just assume that God is going to use us to the degree that we're ready to be used, that we're prepared to be used. We don't want to be caught in that moment where he turns and says, okay, now's your time. And we think, oh, wait a minute. I got to get my mind around this. I got to get ready. I need to hold on a little more loosely to some of these things around me. He said, no, you get yourselves ready because God is about to do something. And in all of our lives, when we're walking out dreams, we're not going to know exactly what he's unfolding for us. We're not going to have all of the answers, but we do have the ability, and I believe the responsibility, to get ourselves ready, to be prepared for whatever it is, so that when that time comes, we've got our armor on. When that time comes, our bags are packed. When that time comes, our helmet's already on. When that time comes, we're strapped up and we're ready to go. We don't know when, we don't know what, but we are ready. And I feel like for me, that's a discipline that I've had to work into my own life, where I don't know when and how God is going to use me, but I'm going to prepare every day like this is the most significant day of my life. I want to be able to hear you clearly. I want to be able to see clearly. I want to be as free as I can of all the stuff and the clutter around me. I want to have as few struggles and as few regrets and as few hangups in my life. I want to be free. I want to be clear. I want to be ready to go. So that when my number is called, that I'm prepared to go. So Joshua was telling the people, get ready. God's getting ready to do something big. You get yourselves ready. How? Prepare your hearts. Purify your lives. Worship. Get yourself in the spot where you're able to be used. Verse 2, it says, 3 days later, the Israelite officers went through the camp, giving these instructions to the people. When you see the Levitical priests carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, move out from your positions and follow them. Since you have never traveled this way before, they will guide you. Stay about a half a mile behind them, keeping a clear distance between you and the ark. Make sure you don't come any closer. They didn't have a map. They didn't have, obviously, a GPS to follow. All they had was a visual that God gave them. There was this ark, which is a box. They had a box. Inside the box were some things important to them. Among other things, there were the 10 Commandments. Those tablets were there. They had preserved those. And this box was, in many ways, symbolic of God's presence in their lives. But there was also this God had touched it element to it, where they couldn't get too close to it. There were some guilty of touching it, and they actually died along the way and as they were on this journey. And they knew that, but they had to keep their eyes on it. They had to be able to know this is, in many ways, true north for us. Wherever that thing is, we're going to go. The priests are carrying the ark, and the priests hopefully are listening to God's voice, and we're moving and we're following them. We're all in this together. We're not following men, we're following the ark of God's presence. And God said, that is how you're going to know where I am and where you need to go. And one of my favorite parts of this entire bit of instruction is him telling the people, where I'm taking you, you've never been there before. You don't know this road. So you need to make sure that you're focused on me. And so the principle that I pull out for my own life personally and for us as a church family is wherever we're going next is not anywhere we have been before. Most of us, especially when we get to a difficult season of life, always talk about going back. I want to go back to that moment when I felt this way, or go back to that moment when this was the way life was for us. Go back to that time when I felt this. Go back to this moment when I had this ability. Go back to this time. We're always wanting to go back. But dream walking is not about going back. Dream walking is about stepping out, walking out the dream that God has for you now. And I don't know that this is a principle that is in every single situation, but I think most of the time when we're following God's plan, his dream, it's going to be to a place we've never been, because it's going to require faith. Over and over again in the story, it says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Throughout the Old Testament, throughout the New Testament as well. So God takes us to places we've never been. Those of you who have made decisions that you're going to lead your home and lead your family to honor God, maybe for the very first time, you're going into a great unknown, a place that you do not know. Some of you are thinking, okay, God, what if I pray and just say, God, give me an opportunity to talk about you, to make a difference in my workplace, or make a difference with my company or with my team, or make a difference here. You're going and you're embarking on a journey. You're going to a place you've never been before. It doesn't always mean it's scary. It doesn't always mean it's dangerous. It just means that you've never been here before, and so you need to stay alert and stay focused. Because if you and I lose sight, if we look down for a while, we look away for a while, we're distracted for a while, we lose our way, and even at times we get a little lost. So he told the people, make sure you are paying attention. In verse 13 of chapter 3, he goes on, he says, the priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. And as soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream. and the river will stand up like a wall. Now, this is the part of the section that usually gets most of the attention, and rightfully so. But this is where people go if you've ever heard this story read out, or if you've ever read it on your own. Many of you read this a couple of weeks ago as you're working through the story of Joshua. But there's something interesting here that's impossible to miss, that the miracle didn't happen until they got their feet wet. And I don't know if that was Joshua's plan beforehand. I don't know if he understood it when he first realized we're about to cross the Jordan, or if in his mind he thought, well, you said you were going to be with Moses, or with me the way you were with Moses, so I guess I'll stand up and I'll hold out my hand, the waters will part, it'll be amazing. I don't know, but in this instance, in this time, he got there and God directed and led the people to actually step in before the waters would move. And I wonder how long they would have been willing to stand there on the edge, praying and holding out all their hands and asking God to move as he had done before. I wonder what their patience level would have been for that. But God said, no, you're going to step into it first. You take the step and then watch me be faithful in this moment. And the flip side of that, if they had gone in and it not parted right away, I wonder how far they would have just kept walking before they said, let's just slow down, back up a little bit. I feel like it was supposed to work differently. I don't know if this is how, but what we do know, what we read is they put their foot in the water. And as soon as they did, the waters began to part. And the principle that I have been stuck on for the last few weeks, maybe it means God was trying to say something to me and maybe not you, but is this: God saves you in his arms, but he leads you on your feet. There's something very comforting and encouraging about being carried, about God leading us. And even the most independent and manly of you men, I will admit, there's a moment there in your faith at some point along the way where it's just kind of nice to think, I don't have to do this. God will just pick me up in his arms and he'll carry me. Because we all go back to a moment where we've needed that. And I know there are times when God realizes we don't have anything left and we're spent, we're exhausted, whatever the case may be. But most of the time, God leads us by saying, come after me. In fact, Jesus didn't say thousands of years later, if anyone would follow me, let him stand where he is and I'll pick you up, put you on my shoulders and we'll walk to eternity. Like that's not the verse. He says, if anyone would follow me, I want you to pick up your cross and walk where I walk. That's much different. That's like, one, that's hard. Two, you're telling me my life is going to be more difficult because now I'm carrying a cross on my back. He says, yeah, that's the way we're going. So even though God does save us in his arms, and there's that moment of, God, I can't believe you rescued me out of this pit, there is some truth to the fact that from that point forward, most of the journey is going to take place with us with our feet on the ground as we're moving along. And there may be some things in your life right now where you're stepping back and wondering, when is God going to break through? I have prayed, my family's still struggling, my relationships are still a mess, my job, my money, my whatever. And God has already actually prepared the miracle. He's just waiting on you to trust him enough to put your foot in the water. And once you do, then you'll see God do his thing. But he's asking you to trust him enough to make a move. I don't know that that's always the case, but I think it's interesting here that God had an entire army of people waiting to get to the promised land who were about to go by faith and attack a nation somehow, or a city somehow that was more prepared than they were, and yet he just wanted them to step foot in the water first. He still wanted them to express faith in that way. Then we get to chapter 4, verse 1. It says, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. So his instruction to the people was, I want one leader from every family to go back into the riverbed where the waters have still parted. Go back to the riverbed near where the ark is, near where the priests are, and I want you to take stones from that riverbed, take it out onto the land, and eventually when the waters come crashing down, I want you to keep those stones with you, because you are going to, with those stones, remember what happened in this moment. And for me, the principle I pull there is that miracles fade to moments when we fail to celebrate the steps. Those big moments in which God takes us from where we never thought we would be to a place that we surely never thought we'd be able to arrive. When he does those things, those miraculous big moments begin to fade to moments and then to minutes and then just to a memory when we fail to stop and celebrate, to honor and respect what just happened. And some of you have stories like that, where you found yourself in a spot that you never thought you would be in a million years. But once you were there, you never dreamed that you would still have a chance to get out and have something to look forward to and have a life on the other side. And God did that for you. And that is your story. But instead of celebrating the moment, you just took off. And that powerful God moment is now merely a memory for you, because you didn't stop and celebrate it. And it would be great if some little shepherd of some local church would take that principle of celebrate every step and make it a core value of the church that he is charged to lead. That's why it's one of our 5. Celebrate every step. Is it because we all need to be encouraged a little? Absolutely. Is it because in some way we would all maybe be a little more faithful if someone would just see the moments of faithfulness that we try to express and recognize that and say attaboy or attagirl? Yeah. But even more than that, it's our only way of being able to make sure these miracle moments don't fade to mere memories. We celebrate every moment along the way. And then in verse 6 and 7, the last ones we'll read today. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. God said, this is why I want you to do this. Because I want you to take those stones out. Because obviously you're not going to forget in a couple of days or even weeks what just happened. But I want you to put these here so that in years, in generations from now, when people are back in this area, when they ask you, what is all this about? You'll retell the story. And you'll be able to once again say, this is what God did. This was his commitment to us. This is how he stepped in. And our past has the power of fueling our present if and only if we're willing to tell our stories, to relay those things, to pass them down. And I know this is difficult, especially for those of you who have children in your home, because you have some moments and you have some stories. But telling your kids how great God is for delivering you eventually has to come with the question, but Daddy, how did we get in the ditch in the first place? And that is less fun to tell, that part of the story. The rescue is great, because ultimately you want them to trust God even to a greater degree than you did at any point in your life. But for them to get the full story, they have to know where you were. And not everything is appropriate at all times, but some of you need to lean in and trust God enough to begin to share that story with your family. Because not a single one of you thinks your child or grandchild is ever going to mess up the way you did again until they do. And until they need that story. And until they are overwhelmed with guilt and shame because of mistakes they've made. And all along, you've got the miracle story in your mind and in your heart. And if you don't share that along the way, that hope never comes, and that hope at times fades and despair begins to set in. Tell those stories. That's why we try to connect you with other people here. I know it just seems like a weird thing, always being pushed to know people. You're so sick of being told to know the person next to you. I get that. I know that. turn and greet people. At least Andy said high five today. At least that was less, intrusive. We don't want that. Most of you don't want to know these people. But here's the thing. Just a couple of seats over from you, more than likely, there is someone who's this close to giving up because they're where you were before your miracle bailed you out. And if they never know that story, they may not come out the way you did. They may not have had the people that you had to step in and encourage you that way. And maybe you had to learn the hard way. Maybe you had no one in your life and God just miraculously pulled you out. Well, I hate that you had no one else, but they don't have to go through it the same way. So telling our stories in many ways allows us to pass down not just a memory, but pass down the miracle to the next generation or the next group of people, whatever the case may be. So that's why God told them to do that. He said, hold on to these, tell them and retell them. We have that responsibility.